The two tracks. Spoken word version. Brussels has said no. The British negotiating position was made public this week. A goods-only single market arrangement. Frictionless trade in physical products, without the obligations of free movement, services regulation, or capital integration. The European response was the one Theresa May received at Chequers in 2018. 4 freedoms or nothing. The cherry-picking principle, restated, 8 years on. This is the price list. It has not changed. It will not change. The internal logic of the European single market does not bend to British domestic political timetables, and it never did. What has changed is that the conversation Britain needs to have about its relationship with Europe has now visibly begun. Wes Streeting said catastrophic mistake out loud at the Progress Conference, and resigned to run for the Labour leadership on those words. Andy Burnham declined to match them. Nigel Farage prepositioned the sovereignty veto within 24 hours. The Green Party conference produced a heckle from the floor when Zach Polanski argued for European alignment, an older male voice, the specific accent of trade unionism, calling out that the EU was a boss's club and always had been. None of these conversations can currently hear each other. The reason they cannot hear each other is the subject of this piece. Streeting's intervention is the data point worth holding. A year ago, the words catastrophic mistake would have been survivable only outside cabinet. This week he resigned and is running on them. The calculation may be wrong, leadership campaigns regularly are, but the calculation itself is information. It tells you where the political gravity is moving. Burnham, addressing the Great North Summit, called Brexit damaging. He declined to match the rejoining language. This is the 2 clocks at work. The political clock, leadership polling, 6-week horizons, the immediate calculations of who can win which selectorate, runs at full speed. The strategic clock, geography, supply chains running through Rotterdam and Calais, security architecture rebuilding itself around the dead spot, runs at a completely different speed. On a completely different conversation. Sector-by-sector alignment is already happening quietly beneath the political surface. Veterinary standards, emissions trading, defense industrial coordination. The strategic clock is moving without democratic mandate, because the political clock cannot yet name what the strategic clock is doing. Streeting names the destination without the price. Burnham names the cost without the destination. Neither yet has the language for the conversation that is actually required. The reason neither has the language is that the language was degraded from 2 directions for 50 years, not 1. The vocabulary cost, the loss of conceptual vocabulary Britain needed for post-industrial navigation, is usually described as a Brexit problem. 8 years of political bandwidth consumed by a backward-looking binary at the exact moment forward-looking questions most needed answering. That account is correct as far as it goes. It does not go far enough. The degradation track on the right is well documented. From the 1975 referendum onwards, the British conservative tradition built a sovereignty argument that escalated across decades from constitutional preference to existential threat. Brussels as colonial overlord. The European Court as foreign tribunal. Freedom of movement as demographic invasion. The vocabulary thickened across 40 years. By 2016, it was capable of carrying a referendum result. The degradation track on the left is less remembered, and is the part this piece wants to name. The Benite anti-European tradition began its own work in the same year. Tony Benn campaigned for no in 1975 and made the case in the language that would define the British socialist position for a generation. The EEC was framed as a boss's club, a constraint on national economic sovereignty, a barrier to socialist economic policy. The vocabulary built from there. State aid rules as neoliberal lock-in, competition policy as anti-public ownership ratchet, the 4 freedoms as the free movement of capital before the free movement of people. The argument had its own internal coherence and its own genuine grievance. It also degraded the conceptual language available to the British left for thinking about European cooperation as anything other than capitalist constraint. These 2 tracks were independent. They ran in parallel. They were not the same argument. They reached opposite voters by opposite routes. What Brexit did was fuse them into a single referendum coalition. And what the referendum then did was require everyone on both sides to defend or attack the fused position, rather than disentangle the 2 arguments inside it. The fusion was incoherent. Sovereignty arguments cannot be made by both the Bennite tradition and the Tufton Street tradition simultaneously without one of them being lying. But it held long enough to win the referendum, and then long enough to lock the country into 8 years of arguing about whether it was right. What has been destroyed is the conceptual language to argue about European alignment as a practical question, rather than an identity question. Both tracks contributed to the destruction. Neither side gets to be the innocent party. The Green Conference heckle is the same problem in a different setting. Polanski made the alignment argument from the stage. The boss's club line came from the floor. Scattered applause, not loud, not isolated. The applause is the data point. The Greens grew to 200,000 members in 8 months by absorbing the impatient left. And the impatient left contains the suppressed Bennite track. The fracture inside the Brexit coalition that has been dormant for 8 years is reappearing inside the progressive coalition that thought it had inherited the problem cleanly. While the centre-left fragments along its 1975 fault line, Nigel Farage is doing different work. He has spent the week reframing any future move toward European alignment as undemocratic. Mix. Voting at general elections irrelevant, he said at a reform rally on Wednesday. The phrasing is worth pausing on. It does not say that European alignment is the wrong policy. It says that European alignment by any future parliament is structurally illegitimate, regardless of mandate, because it overturns the 2016 result. This is structured opportunism. The 2016 result is being converted from a single democratic decision into a veto in perpetuity. Any subsequent parliamentary majority that disagrees is by definition undemocratic. The framing delegitimizes the next election before it happens. It is the same authoritarian move reform deployed at council level after May, when sudden inability to deliver basic services was attributed to bureaucratic sabotage, rather than to the absence of any actual governing program. The mechanism is identical. The thing you cannot do is your opponent's fault by definition. The democratic mandate you might lose is illegitimate by definition. Farage is not arguing for Brexit. He is arguing that Brexit cannot be argued about by anyone ever again. That is not a position about Europe. That is a position about democracy. What an honest conversation would need is the disentangling that was prevented by the referendum's fusion. 3 questions, currently argued about as if they were one, that need to be separated explicitly. The first question is whether European alignment is in Britain's practical national interest, given geography, supply chains, security architecture, and the dead spot. This is a Layer 1 structural question. The answer is fairly clear, regardless of political tradition. Britain is a medium-sized European island of 67 million people. Its goods trade runs predominantly through Rotterdam, Calais, and the Channel ports. Its energy infrastructure is interconnected with continental grids. Its defense architecture is rebuilding itself around a Russia problem that requires European cooperation by definition. The Office for Budget Responsibility's most recent assessment estimates a 4% long-run productivity reduction under the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. Imports and exports both 15% lower than the counterfactual. New trade deals have produced no material offsetting impact. Whatever one thinks of the EU institutionally, the structural case for alignment is straightforward. Where serious disagreement exists, it sits at the level of identity, sovereignty, and accountability, not at the level of geography or trade arithmetic. That distinction is itself one of the things the vocabulary cost has obscured. The second question is what form alignment should take. Customs Union, EEA, sectoral agreements. Security frameworks independently of trade. There are real trade-offs. A customs union closes out independent trade deals and binds Britain to EU external tariff decisions without representation in setting them. The EEA delivers more market access, but requires the 4 freedoms in full. Sectoral agreements deliver less but preserve more flexibility. These are genuine choices with genuine consequences. They are not the same as the first question. Conflating them is what has prevented serious engagement with either. The third question is the Bennite question, and it is not stupid even when asked in bad faith. What are the democratic accountability mechanisms within supranational structures? The EU's institutional architecture is not a settled democratic form. The European Parliament has limited initiative powers. The Commission is not directly elected. The Council operates by mechanisms that even informed citizens of member states find opaque. The Bennite tradition raised this question in 1975, and it has not been adequately answered since. It can be raised in bad faith, as cover for sovereignty nationalism, as alibi for opting out of inconvenient cooperation, as displacement activity for class politics, but the bad faith users do not invalidate the question. A serious European left needs to be able to argue for closer European cooperation, and for stronger democratic accountability within European institutions simultaneously. Neither track of the 1975 vocabulary degradation has equipped the British left to do this. The mechanism that might unblock the conversation is not domestic. It is geopolitical. This is the part of the analysis that sits at structurally plausible speculation rather than evidentially grounded inference. Label it. Hold it lightly. Do not predict the trigger. Do read the conditions. The conditions are these. Russia is engaged in a sustained pattern of grey zone activity below the Article 5 threshold. GPS jamming, undersea cable interference, infrastructure probing. The Defense Secretary's RAF Falcon 900LX had its GPS jammed flying near Kaliningrad earlier this year, documented, attributed, treated as routine. The legal frameworks Western states use to govern their security responses recognize only binary states, peace or war. The grey zone is designed to exploit the absence of intermediate categories. The bureaucratic response is already underway, and worth naming, because it is the strategic clock made institutional. NATO has been revising its hybrid doctrine since 2022. Resilience architecture, undersea cable monitoring, GPS spoofing countermeasures, civilian infrastructure hardening, is being procured across European member states in coordinated tranches that did not exist 5 years ago. Defence industrial integration between Britain, France, Germany, and Poland is happening at a pace the political conversation has not caught up with. The strategic clock is moving fast inside the procurement systems, while the political clock is still arguing about whether to acknowledge the strategic clock exists. The forcing function, if it comes, is the incident that requires Britain to publicly choose. Not a sudden rupture. Not Putin invading Estonia. Something more ambiguous. The kind of incident the binary framework cannot ignore but cannot easily declare a war over. In any such scenario, the permission structure for closer European defence and economic alignment changes faster than domestic political timetables can absorb. Britain ends up either inside that conversation or visibly outside it. The current red lines do not survive contact with that environment. This is not a prediction. It is the description of conditions present. The window that opened with the Iran crisis has partially closed as that crisis redirected attention. The next window will require something larger to open it. Below the structural argument sits the tactical question of what is actually likely in the near term. Here, the answer is the customs union, the realistic policy move within the next Labour leadership cycle. A future leader running explicitly on customs union membership, rather than full rejoining, bypasses the referendum question, while delivering most of what British business needs in terms of frictionless goods trade. It closes out independent trade deals. But given that the US deal has produced limited material impact and the India deal is narrower than its political presentation, that cost may be judged acceptable. This is what to watch for, not full rejoining. Streeting's catastrophic mistake language is signalling the destination. Burnham's reluctance to match it is reading the marginals. The customs union splits the difference. It meets the strategic clock partially without the political clock catastrophe of a second referendum. It is not sufficient. It does not address the security architecture question, the democratic accountability question, or the structural dependency chain. It is what is available. The honest assessment is that the available is usually what gets done. The outside toilet problem operates from both directions, and an honest piece names both directions. Leavers remember community, security, and purpose from periods when Britain was less economically integrated with Europe. They have forgotten, or did not personally know, the conditions those things sat inside. The outside toilet was a brick shed at the bottom of the garden you walked to in February in the dark. The bath was a tin tub in front of the fire on Friday night, same water used by everyone in the household in order of seniority. Damp walls produced tuberculosis. Most houses heated one room. The community is being remembered. The toilet is being forgotten. They were produced by the same conditions. You cannot have one without the other, and you cannot reproduce either by tariff walls or immigration policy. Remainers have their own version of the problem. Freedom of movement let an outdoor instructor work French ski resorts for over a decade. Built a life around it. Lost something real to the Brexit settlement that has not been recovered, and is not coming back without rejoining the single market. The honesty owed in the other direction is that freedom of movement also changed the character of specific communities faster than those communities could absorb. The communities saying so were not lying. They were not all racist. They were describing a real phenomenon that the metropolitan liberal response too often dismissed. Both things are true. The honest conversation requires holding both. Neither track of the 1975 vocabulary degradation has equipped either side to do this. The conversation has started. It is starting badly. Streeting names the destination without the price. Burnham names the cost without the destination. The EU has restated the price list and nobody is reading it honestly. Farage is converting the sovereignty veto into permanent constitutional immunity. The Benite tradition is finding a new host institution. The grey zone is already the battlefield. The window that opened is partially closed. The three questions need separating. The customs union is what is available in the near term. The security forcing function may be what unblocks the longer conversation. The honest assessment is this is a decade-plus project. The outdoor educator's discipline is to read the weather before it arrives. The mountain does not care whether the conversation has happened. The weather is coming. Britain's political vocabulary no longer fits the country Britain is. That is the work. Start from where you actually are.